It needs some work doing on it, and it's currently with staff getting that sorted out. So, do we have any declarations of interest in any item on the agenda, please? I'm not seeing any signals. Thank you. I do have some town mayor's announcements. First of all, on the 16th of November, there was a National Transport Planning Conference. The annual conference was held virtually this year, and the keynote speaker was Rachel McLean MP, who's the Parliamentary Under Secretary of State at the Department of Transport. The Royal College of Arts and the Transport Planning Society jointly presented the results of their work on Our Future Place, Our Future Journeys, for which, of course, Biggleswade was one of the 3 places involved. Since then, I've been contacted by the Transport Planning Society saying that they would like to use the toolkit that has now been developed for some further work in Biggleswade, looking at people's aspirations for the town. This would be some great engagement with residents, which would be useful for the future planning of our services. However, funding needs to be found, and I wait to hear further detail on what would be involved. The examination in public of the Central Bedfordshire Draft Local Plan resumed today, and I attended the session on employment strategy. The Town Council has submitted its hearing statement, and I did not expect to contribute further on behalf of the Council. However, I learned more about the issues from listening to the particular discussion on Home Farm and New Spring Farm, and made 3 points to the inspector. Loss of the only arable land left within the parish, the requirement for improvements to access to the A1, and given the long queues that we already experience, and I questioned the viability of Home Farm given the large amount of infrastructure required for alternative transport to the site, including improvements to National Cycle Route 12 and a bridle bridge over the A1. There was talk about the cycle route needing to be properly surfaced and lit if people are going to use it as access to work and home and back home this time of year, which is why I made that last point. And finally, you may remember that there was to be a study visit to Biggleswade organised by the National Association of Local Councils. This was to be over 2 days to look at the Town Council's involvement in strategic planning, given the large amount of growth in the town. The visit had to be cancelled due to COVID. Mr. Tarrant and I were then approached by NALC to present a webinar in January entitled In Conversation, Biggleswade Strategic Planning for Larger Projects. We will both give short presentations and then lead breakout groups. NALC limited the webinar to 50 people and it has already sold out. We'll report further in due course. Thank you. We now come to public open session. As usual, 15 minutes for members of the public to put questions or address the council pertaining to matters listed on the agenda. So each person has up to 3 minutes and 1 3-minute slot. Would anybody like to speak, please? Could you raise your electronic hand because we can't see you, we can only see your names. I'm not seeing any people with their hand up, so I'm going to continue. It's my pleasure to invite a presentation from Central Bedfordshire Council on the current and projected care needs of the community. We've invited our speaker, who is Mr. Tobin Stevenson, who's Head of Service for the department which is meeting the needs of older people, the accommodation needs of older people. And this has come about because of the consultation on Abbotsbury Care Home. So, Mr. Stevenson, can you put your video on now? And we're in your hands for your presentation, please.
Can you see and hear me, councillors?
Yes, we can now, thank you.
Excellent, thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me here this evening. I've got nothing pictorial because I wasn't going to take the chance of IT failure. So what I have will be in the form of just a bit of audio, and of course happy to take questions after I've completed that. So if I just share with you some information, we know it's well documented that we have an ageing population in the UK. And in planning for the future, my team's commissioned research to understand how this will play out locally. That research predicts supply and demand for care homes and other types of accommodation for older people, including, for example, independent living. Alongside this, Central Bedfordshire Council has committed to finding or providing replacement capacity for its care homes, which are about 40 or 50 years old and lack the facilities of modern care homes. We've found capacity for 3 care homes and closed these already, and we're building care homes to provide capacity for 2 more. This leaves Allison House in Sandy and Abbotsbury in Biggleswade. And as you're aware, Quantum Care will take ownership of a new care home on London Road in 2021. And this represented a really good opportunity for us to consider options for Abbotsbury Care Home. Excuse me. I understand that you're seeking reassurance that the potential closure of Abbotsbury would not result in a deficit of places in Biggleswade. And in that regard, I confirm that our research suggests that there is enough care home capacity in the Ivor Valley area to meet demand up to around 2027-28. That includes without having Abbotsbury Care Home amongst those. And it's also true to say that new developments to date have generally been in Biggleswade rather than the wider Ivor Valley area. So we think it's well served. You'll be aware, of course, of Penrose Court, which has got 65 additional places, a couple of years old now, and Mantles Court will add 76, albeit with the potential loss of Abbotsbury. If no one else delivers any care capacity before 2027-2028, then we plan to do that ourselves. One of the things the council has done is identified and created a new care company in order to be able to deliver care for older people in the future, and that care company will run the 2 care homes that I mentioned that we're creating ourselves. And I think the other thing to say is that Sorrel Way Independent Living Scheme, which again I'm sure you're well aware of, that will be a new asset for the town, and it should reduce care home demand by providing further accommodation for the older population. So in summary, the supply of care home places in the next 7 years is very likely to be sufficient for the area. If the market did not have a plan to deliver further care home places by 2027-28, then we would expect to make a case to deliver one ourselves, a care home. In the meantime, we'll be monitoring supply and demand as we do constantly in case there are any changes. So I hope that's been useful for you as you consider your response on the consultation to the future of Abbotsbury Care Home, and I'm happy, Councillor, to take any questions that people might have.
Thank you, Tobin. Councillors, Councillor Ramsey, please, and then Councillor Pullinger.
Good evening. When you talk about care available in the Ivor Valley area, what actually are the boundaries that we're talking about? Because that seems a little bit of a loose description to me.
So we work in 4 quadrants, Councillor, Ivor Valley being one of them. To the north, the extent is the northern boundary of Bedfordshire, so around sort of Sandy Potton area. To the south, it goes down below Arlesey and Stopfold, and then out towards Shefford, though stop short of there. So it's a bigger area. We have to do our research on areas that have sufficient quantum to be able to have to deliver results that are meaningful. So that gives you an idea of what we're looking at. But as I mentioned, the delivery of care home places in the Ivor Valley area has actually been quite concentrated on Biggleswade. So actually, when I say 27-28 is the point at which we want to be looking at additional capacity, actually it probably won't be Biggleswade in the Ivor Valley area that will be of the greatest need at that point. We think that Biggleswade will be well served for years to come. But as I say, if the care home market itself doesn't take up the call for additional places by then in that area, then we'll be looking at the potential for delivering somewhere in the Ivor Valley area.
All right, thank you.
Councillor Pullinger.
Thank you. I think you may have slightly answered the second part of my question, but you talked about capacity up until about 2027. So that seems like it's a long way away, but in the realms of development and building new facilities, it doesn't seem terribly far away. So do you have any plans and any ideas around where the next raft of capacity might be, and might it, for example, be in a similar way that Penrose was built within the King's Reach development? Might it be something that's pushed to be built within the Land East development that's got planning permission?
The answer to the second part is quite possibly, subject again to planning permission for that specific use. There would be other sites coming forward, no doubt whatsoever, at the point in time when we'd be looking at that. To give you an idea, the care home we're building in Leighton Buzzard is currently in for detailed planning. We started last year and it will be completed in 2022. So round about a 3-year window from concept to doors opening. So on that basis, yeah, I agree, it feels a long time away, but we'd be looking probably around about 23, 24 to have an idea of what it was that we needed to land. Bearing in mind that up to that point, we've had an interesting time, haven't we, recently, and particularly when it comes to older people. And we think that research may point to slides in one direction or another when it comes to the need for capacity. We need more research in the time that we're talking about over those next 3 or 4 years to be sure that we're landing care home places in the places that they're needed.
Thank you. Councillor Strawn, then Councillor Alban.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As far as Abbotsbury is concerned, that is council run, and therefore there's presumably a large number of council placed residents there. Are there any how many private residents proportionately are there in Abbotsbury, if any? And in terms of the council, if you're going to be putting people into private accommodation, how's that going to be funded? And are the rates council's getting favourable to the council compared to the private sector, which is, I think, one of the general rules of care homes, and the councils get or charge considerably less than the private care homes?
Yeah, it's a very good point, Councillor. So there is a split. It's primarily council placed people at Abbotsbury Care Home, as it is in most of our care home, but there are a few residents who pay either all or some of their costs at Abbotsbury. We would expect, as we have done previously with moving people from one care home to another, to negotiate that people will not pay any more, and we won't pay any more than we currently do. So we provide a kind of anchor, if you like, for a lot of new care homes, providing a number of people, albeit at a lower rate that care home will charge for others. Yes, Councillor, sorry.
What guarantee have you got that these private care homes are actually going to comply with your requirements financially? Because what happens if they say no? So
before we embark on the process that we're embarking on, so consulting on a number of options, we make sure that those options are deliverable. That's part of the process of taking these forward. And so we've had conversations with Quantum Care in this case, as we did previously when we moved helped people move into a Quantum care home in the south part of the county. So we've had conversation with them and got an indication that we will be able to place people without any increase in charge to the council.
Thank you. Councillor Alban.
Thank you. If I understood what you said correctly, you're setting up a company to run some homes. Is that right?
The council, voted to create a company that
Right.
will then deliver care homes. Yeah.
So I'm just interested in what the drivers behind that might have been.
So I think that goes back a little way. So I mentioned the care home that we're building in Leighton Buzzard. It became increasingly difficult to establish the kind of deal that we are able to see with the Quantum Care, who are a not-for-profit organisation with a lot of care homes that are built are very much for profit. Much more difficult for us to find places to place at our rates in those care homes, and therefore be able to close our very old, very much older care homes. So with that in mind, we felt that we were going to get to the point where we needed to run care homes again ourselves. We had been sort of moving towards using the market more widely, and we still see the private market, as having an important part to play. But actually, it was just becoming increasingly difficult to be able to do what we're describing. We could have effectively continued to run from within the council, but there are difficulties in us being able to charge differential rates if we do that, and that impacts on the affordability of delivering care. So while we're not looking to make money out of the care company and it providing care, what we are doing is ensuring that we've got access to the market at rates that we can afford, which has proved, as I say, quite difficult to achieve more recently. And there are some good examples of some fabulous care homes in your area, not directly, I don't think, I'm not thinking ones specifically in Biggleswade, but in your area that charge a great deal more per week, lovely places to live, but not affordable to the council.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else wish to ask any questions or make any comments? No? Oh, Councillor Mark Foster.
Yeah, I guess one of the questions that might come up is, in the event that Abbotsbury does close, what's the process for moving residents of Abbotsbury into Mantles Court or alternative accommodation? How would that be delivered?
We've got, as I mentioned before, obviously we've done this a number of times before, Councillor Foster, and we have an experienced team which we've retained over quite a number of years now. We have an established process that we've used on a number of occasions, and we publish that when we deliver our final report to our executive, the process that will be used. I can assure you it is very thorough. It starts quite early with conversations, assessments actually, first of all, about people's capacity to be able to make decisions, conversations about where it is they want to live. It's not a case of we've got care home for you and therefore that's where you're going. People do take different decisions. Some people find they've got capacity to live in an independent living, for example, and so we've had 1 or 2 people move to that type of accommodation. Other people, their families maybe have moved away, or it was the nearest possible care home at the time, and they would like their relative to be somewhere closer to where they're able to access. So we have conversations about where people would like to live. We make sure we've got enough places, obviously, at the care home that we identify for everybody, but that doesn't mean that they need to go there. So that's part of the process as well. And then we work with the new care home and care homes. We do things like generate life story books so that the staff of the new care home understand the residents that they're getting in some detail. They're really helpful to understand the residents' likes and dislikes, where they've come from, what they're about. And we also don't, it's not one day you live at Abbotsbury and the next day you live at a new care home. The transition is gradual. We take people to visit if they're able. Excuse me. And we do that on a number of occasions to help get them comfortable, to understand the new home that they're going to. And then when we do move people, we move them in very small numbers at a time over a very long period of time. And our director is extremely cautious about ensuring that people have the right move for them. And Julie, our director, she's the one who makes the final decision about when the care home that's being emptied is closed. And she's extended those decisions before on the basis of a number of residents maybe better staying put for a period of time than actually being moved and risked, if that makes sense. So it's a very it's by now quite a well-established process, tried and tested, improved upon each time, and it has been very effective at helping people to move from one home to another.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else, colleagues? No? Well, thank you very much, Tobin, for that.
Yes, thank you very much, Jenny.
Yes, it's good to hear in a bit more detail exactly what will happen, and reassuring to understand how you actually move people when the time comes. So thank you very much for that, and goodbye.
Thank you, everybody. Good night, councillors.
Right. We're now on to members' questions. Do members have questions, please? Councillor Alban.
Thank you. I've got one or two. The first is concerning Buttercup Mead. I noticed the near to the junction with Chambers Way, a fence has been removed. I'm guessing by the developers, but I don't know. It was in a poor state of repair, but as a result, the play area there is kind of three-sided. There's rails on three sides, but the fourth side is open. I just wondered if there are any plans to address that.
Do we have any answers to that? I suspect that we weren't fully aware of that, Councillor Alban. So
it's a fairly recent development, I think.
yeah. So I think the clerk will take that forward, won't you?
Absolutely. I wasn't aware of that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
And a second one?
Yeah, I've got a couple more questions. So regarding the removal of railings around White Hart car park, as councillors know, I've been concerned about the pedestrian safety following the removal. My understanding is that they were removed by CBC using government funding for to help stop the spread of coronavirus. Although in the case of these railings, I don't see how that could possibly aid social distancing, because if you needed to step out of the way, you'd probably step into a roundabout. So I kind of see that as a misuse of government funding. But I wonder if there was any consultation from CBC to the town council, and if so, what the response might have been. But more importantly, when there are large events in the square, like the Christmas light switch on, for instance, and we're hoping to have more events at different times of the year, but there are large crowds moving around the town centre, and I know it's difficult to guide pedestrians safely over the roadway between the White Hart car park and the Market Square proper. So the railings were originally there to guide pedestrians to safe crossing points. So I just wonder if that's been taken into account for any planning for functions in the Market Square. So we might need to consider alternatives like temporary barriers or road closures. So I wonder if any of those kinds of options have been thought about.
Well, shall I start by answering it, and perhaps the clerk can come in if I'm missing anything out? The town council wasn't consulted per se. We were told that it was going to happen, but the town council didn't make any representation about any particular items of the street furniture and whether they should be retained or not, except to ask that if any of the cycles were removed, that they be kept and we would use them as effectively sculpture somewhere else. And you mentioned the Christmas fair and the problems we did have a couple of years ago at the bottom of Station Road. And as a result of that, we have been thinking about road closures. It wasn't a very good thing, the way people were wandering across that road when the road was open to traffic, with lots of traffic coming from the station with incoming trains that time of night. So it is something that we need to be aware of, and it may be that we need to have temporary barriers, but also people there monitoring what's going on if we don't have a road closure. Mr. Clark, is there anything you wish to add to that?
No, other than to underline what you said in regard to consultation, that we didn't know the specifics of what was and wasn't going to be taken away. So no.
Okay.
Can I just ask one more thing? You mentioned the removal of the bikes. So, assuming they're removed, do we know if CBC are going to replace cycle parking, because there needs to be adequate cycle parking in the town centre?
Again, we haven't had any conversations with CBC on that. I can see Councillor Fage may have some information. Councillor Fage.
My understanding, if my memory serves me correctly, is that they are due to be replaced, but with the sort of bike racks that we have outside of Peacocks, which are slightly smaller. I actually spoke to Councillor Watkins and asked him to liaise with Sam Colbeck at Central Beds to hold on to the larger bikes if they are removed, and if that does go ahead, as Councillor Russell says, for use elsewhere in the town. But my understanding is that they will be replaced. We'll retain the larger bikes, but they will be replaced with sort of smaller cycle railings to tie your bike to chain your bike to, rather.
Okay. Do I have any more members' questions? Councillor Knight.
Oh, thank you. I noticed today on the Town Council's Facebook page that we've announced the reopening of the tennis courts, which is fantastic. But I was slightly puzzled to realise that although the tennis courts have reopened Monday to Friday, they're closed on Saturday and Sunday, which may be a popular time. So I did a quick bit of research, and it looks like that's not a new thing. It looks like last year in the summer, the tennis courts were open 7 days a week, and in the winter, Monday through Friday. I was wondering if they were shut at the weekend during the winter for operational reasons, or whether because we don't think there's any demand, and if anyone had any more details on that, please.
Okay. I can't see, I mean, other than bad weather, I can't see any logical reason to close them. So if there's an overwhelming need to suggest that they stay open, then from an operational perspective, I can't see any reason why not.
Okay, so you'll look into that further for us. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Woodhead.
Thank you. It's more really just rather than a question, it's more of a, I guess, a thank you and that Peter can pass on, the town clerk can pass on to the staff for obviously pulling together the light show and the Christmas sort of events that are ongoing. It's not just been one night, but I think early indications are from speaking to shopkeepers and from townsfolk on social media, it's been very well received. It's been very popular, particularly those with young children, I think, have enjoyed it as well. So so really it was just something to pass on to Peter, to pass on to the staff, to say, you know, thank you for helping to pull that together. And I think it's fair to say that the town have really sort of enjoyed it, and the variety and the difference that we've had this year. So certainly I think a well done there, and long may it continue until the 23rd of or 24th of December. So, thank you.
Thank you for your kind words. I'll pass that on to staff.
Thank you. Anybody else? No. Okay, I'm moving on to the minutes of the last meeting on the 10th of November. I'm starting on page 7 in the pack, which is page 1 of the minutes. And I'm going through first for accuracy. Any issues on page 7, please? Page 8. Page 9. Page 10. Page 11. Page 12. Page 13. Page 14. Page 15. Page 16. Page 17. I'm getting no indication. So is council happy for me to sign them as a correct record, please? Yes, can you indicate, please? Thank you very much. Thank you. So now matters arising from those minutes which aren't elsewhere on the agenda. I don't think there'll be anything on page 1. So page 2 of the minutes, that's page 8 of the agenda pack. Page 9. Councillor Strawn.
Do we know what happened about the planning application under item 5 that CBC said they were going to submit on the 1st of December and had to be submitted by the 1st of December for the funding issue?
They've decided that that's not an issue and they are doing some further work, and 3 councillors have been involved in a workshop with Central Beds. They are looking at alternative options. There is going to be another meeting before Christmas, and as soon as we can, I think we need to bring the subject back to council and ask for another presentation. But from what we've seen, because I was in that meeting, the officers involved, particularly Christian Baudet, have really taken on board all the comments that were made by both members of the public and councillors, and are looking for alternative ways forward.
Thank you very much. That's gratifying to know the positive approach by CBC in this instance.
Yes, thank you. Anything else on page 9? Page 10? Page 11? Page 12? Page 13? Page 14? Page 15? Page 16? Page 17? No indication, so moving on again on the agenda, and we're on to planning applications. The first one is 8 Kittiwake Close, single-storey front extension and porch. Colleagues.
No objection, subject to neighbours.
Are we all happy with that? Yes? Okay. The next one is Biggleswade United Football Club, replacing 4 floodlight stanchions. And this has been to the council before. Comments, please, colleagues.
Move no objection.
Okay, are we happy with that? Yes, thank you very much. The annex, 148B Drove Road, retrospective planning permission for the annex. Do we have any comments on this, please? Again, it was on a previous agenda. Councillor Foster, please.
Yeah, this seems to be a little bit of an unfortunate one. The residents appear to have purchased the property 12 years ago on the understanding that there was the annex had got planning permission, and subsequently been informed by CBC officers that it doesn't have planning permission. It may be directly as a result of an officer visiting the site following the investigations around the Drove Road development. So it's an interesting point, but I think in this situation, the fact that they've had a council tax bill and the annex is, but so it's an established site. In my view, I don't think there's any issue with the application as such. I think we should offer no objection whatsoever.
Are we all happy with that, colleagues? Yeah. Okay. Right, the next one is 168 Drove Road, garage conversion and modification of roof structure. This is a revised plan, again on the agenda before. Any comments, colleagues? Councillor Fage? Councillor Fage, sorry.
Sorry, it doesn't look terribly dissimilar to before. It looks as though they've changed the first story slightly and some of the storage above what was the garage. We objected previously on the grounds of the loss of parking in an area which has insufficient off-street parking and tight residential parking. So I don't see any reason to make any new additions other than what we said before and refer back to our previous objection. But happy to hear what others say, of course.
Councillor Foster.
I'll just add something in on that one. I think I read within the papers on the application that I can't remember which officer it was, but a CPC officer had actually had a look at this and established that the garage couldn't or wasn't considered to be a parking space as such. So the property would normally expect to have 2 parking spaces, and I think the officers didn't deem that it was a loss of parking spaces as such, because there is capacity to have 2 on site, albeit they are tight. There is one there and another one sort of right in front of the property. So I'm slightly concerned that in this one, I'm not sure there is an actual proper loss of parking in this case. So although we did object to it on those grounds previously, I'm not convinced that it's actually necessary in this case.
Okay, well, Councillor Fage did propose an objection. Do I have a seconder for that?
Sorry.
Councillor Fage, would you like to come back?
Yeah, I was going to revise that then based on what Councillor Foster's said, because if that's new information which has come to light, then it's only right that we take that on board. And to be fair, it looks as though they're still pretty much compliant with Central Beds' bedrooms -1 policy for parking spaces if there are 2. So maybe we go back and say we've taken into consideration what officers have said, and on those grounds we revise to no objection, subject to neighbours and our usual wording.
Colleagues, are we happy with that suggestion? Yes? Okay. Sorry, I'm just writing down so that I know. Thank you. 16 Gale Drive, change of use from home office garage to home hairdressers. What do we think about hairdressers at 16 Gale Drive, colleagues? Councillor Pullinger and then Councillor Leslie Fage.
Thank you. So this premises is what was the sales office for the recent Bloor Bellway development, the old Bloor sales office. So it's the upper floor above what is a garage beneath now. In terms of its location and the impact I think it would have to residents, I think there is space for parking there. There's 3 on-site spaces. The application and the recommendation from officers around the restricted hours is there. So it would be restricted, or the application was 9:30 till 5, I think it was Monday to Friday, and 9 till 5 on a Saturday. And the officers' recommendation is similar, so there will be no use on a Sunday. So I would like to propose no objections subject to the condition around the operating hours.
Do I have a seconder for that? Yes, Councillor Leslie Fage. You were going to speak anyway, Councillor Fage.
Yeah, I'll just second what Councillor Pullinger said about the hours. And so long as they're adhered to and so long as the neighbours are aware, I can't see it being a problem really.
Thank you. Councillor Grant Fage.
Yeah, I think this is right. Just to stress, in the past we have objected to planning applications of changes of residential units in residential areas to commercial, but obviously we have to consider each on its merits, I think, and this one looks pretty sensible. Maybe we could just, if Councillor Pullinger is happy, just to really stress the subject to neighbours piece and really make sure that every resident of Gale Drive is consulted properly and receives the normal letter from Central Beds. I don't know what normal protocol is, but I think it makes sense to stress that. One second observation, I noticed a few mistakes on the application form. Particularly, they ticked, I think, the wrong box when saying they weren't changing a residential unit, which is possibly true, but they also said there was not going to be any impact to employment, which I suspect is not true either, given that there'll probably be a hairdresser there. So, I mean, if I could, I'm not saying there's any problem as such, but perhaps we could just stress something about signage, because if the applicant has made a couple of mistakes on the form, maybe we could just stress that we don't want to see, any sort of signage outside this premises, because that probably wouldn't be appropriate for a residential area. It's a small point, but I think just in light of some of the mistakes that appear to be on the application, that might just be worth stressing to make sure that we're clear about that, if Councillor Pullinger is happy, of course.
Councillor Pullinger?
Yeah, so I'm happy to add that in. So that will be stressing the subject to neighbours piece, which I didn't actually mention, of course, and the item about signage. I would add, not quite related to this article, but there is actually another similar new business starting very close to this, and I actually mistook it for this application when I first heard about this application. So there may be a follow-up action for us to do to understand whether there's any requirement for an outbuilding which is being used elsewhere, not far from this, being used as a hairdresser's, which has recently opened.
Okay. Yes, I think it's probably something we need to be a bit careful about, isn't it? We don't want housing areas to be overtaken by employment. So the proposal is no objection, subject to the operating hours being adhered to, subject to neighbours, and no signage. All those in favour, please show. Yeah, okay, thank you. That's passed. 40 Courtlands Drive, single storey front extension. Any comments, colleagues? Councillor Mark Foster.
Yeah, I had a look at this one, and I don't know whether it's me, but when I looked at the application and to trying to put the drawings didn't seem to match, or certainly the elevations didn't seem to match with what would be realistic or possible. Now, that may be my interpretation of it. They seem to be putting an extension on the front, but the angle, the roof angle, seems to be maintained in the way that it is previously. I'm not quite sure how that's possible. So and I may be misreading the thing, but it's obviously it appears to be a building that's joined. So and I was trying to work out how the developer, how the application actually has the extension on the front with essentially a pent roof, and how it works. So I have concerns about it, but that may be to do with the way that the drawings are or the way that I've interpreted it. I'm not sure whether colleagues have seen the same issue that I have, but in principle, I don't have a problem with a single-story extension. I just have a problem with the way that either the drawings are or the way that it potentially impacts directly on the next door neighbour, because it's a front extension on a semi-detached property with the roof angled. That seems to be different. I'm not really explaining myself very clearly here, but those will have read the report. Hopefully, will see what I mean. So I'm not sure whether there's an objection there, but it certainly looks something that needs to be considered.
Okay, so we may want to raise a concern.
Yeah. Has anybody else seen any issues with it, or is it just me? It may just be me viewing it differently to others.
Are there any other comments, colleagues? So I think what we're proposing is that it's no objection, but it's subject to neighbours, and particularly with regards to the, I think we're talking about light, aren't we?
Well, it is, but it's the light, but it's also how this extension interacts with the building directly attached, i.e. the semi-detached, the other semi on the attached to it. And again, it may be that the design is fine, but it doesn't look to be to me. And I think there's some consideration that needs to be made, at least, even if it's just to allay my fears.
So we're saying no objections subject to neighbours, but particularly the effect on the adjoining property. Does that phrase it okay?
I think so, yes.
Yeah, okay. Are we all happy with that? No objections subject to neighbours, but particularly the effect on the adjoining property. Can you show if you're in agreement with that, please? Thank you very much. 2 to 6 High Street. Again, it's been on the agenda before. The difference seems to be an addition of a security fence. I don't know whether there's anything else that colleagues have noticed. Comments, please. No. Councillor Woodhead.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd like to add, obviously we've it's come before us before, but I do know they have had a couple of break-ins there at the courtyard centre. So I suspect that's probably why the security fence has come about. So I think they have been quite conscious of sort of crime issues and things, but otherwise I don't have a problem, but I can understand why they might need that. So that's the only thing really.
Yes, there is a problem with drug users in the churchyard, isn't there? Okay, so what's the proposal for this? No objection? Yes? Okay, I'm getting nods. 63 High Street, conversion of existing bank to physiotherapy clinic, residential flats above, construction of new residential block to rear, change of use on the listed building consent, which is the next item, but we might as well take them together. Any comments, please? Councillor Fage.
I think there are some slight tweaks to access over this, which I know Highways asked questions about, which I think that's probably why this is back. When I looked at this on the portal, it was quite refreshing actually to see that they'd taken on board our comments about sound assessments, and there was a pretty extensive document there going into some of the detail around some of the mitigating actions they're putting in place, which is refreshing. So I'd like to refer back to our previous response, basically no objection, subject to neighbours. I know I certainly don't have a problem with this, but I'm obviously welcome to hear what others say as well, because it is quite an important application for the town centre.
Thank you. Colleagues, further comments? Councillor Strawn.
Thank you. Just for clarification, could Councillor Fage confirm that he would still want the points raised in our previous no objection with regard to particularly permit policies for the flats and the clinic?
Yes. Sorry, I probably didn't make that clear. I think that's sensible.
So if it's on that basis that it's basically the same subject of comments about the noise assessment, which seems to be carried out, I'd happily second Councillor Fage's proposal.
Thank you. All those in favour then? Thank you very much. Right. Sorry, I'm moving on too soon. 8 Parry Rise, single-storey rear extension and park garage conversion. Councillor Fage, yes?
Well, I looked at this, it looks as though the garage is now retained and they're extending further around the other side of the house. That was certainly my interpretation of what's being proposed. And so it doesn't look like we're losing the garage, which is a good thing because we said we don't want to lose the garage and they've changed the plans as a result. So I'd propose no objection. Again, happy to hear what others said. I only had a brief chance to look at this.
Thank you. Councillor Leslie Page.
They are losing, excuse me, they are losing the use of the garage. They're keeping some of it there, but you can't park a car. It still doesn't address all the issues with off-street parking that's there. And as a 4-bed house, there still won't be adequate parking. So to me, they haven't addressed our concerns. That's how I read it.
Okay. So what's the proposal I have? I think Councillor Grant Fage was saying no objection.
Councillor Foster looks like he wants to come in.
Yeah, I was just, do I have a seconder? Because Councillor Leslie Fage is thinking the opposite. No, okay, well, I'll come to Councillor Foster then, please.
I got to be honest. When I looked at the application, and I read the plans and looked at the existing plans, and I have to say there seems to be some inconsistencies about what's actually there, or what's the existing or what's not existing, because there appears to be an extension on the back of the building already, but on one existing floor plan it shows an extension on the back, and one it shows it down the side. And again, it may be my interpretation of it, but when I read the documents, I wasn't clear what's currently there, and it seems to show something differently on the plan. So again, I have no objection to the extension per se, other than I agree with Councillor Leslie Fage as far as the garages, but I'm just not clear exactly what's there at the moment. And again, perhaps someone else can enlighten me, because when I read it, it didn't make sense. I guess there's not, but it must be me that's looking at it differently. But when I looked at the two existing plans, so the before and after, you know, there's they don't seem to. I think the proposed plans don't seem to show the extension that's on the back of the building on the existing plans. Does that make sense?
I think so. Councillor Grant,
help me out here.
I think part of the problem was, if I'm not mistaken, they were showing the existing plan, the status quo, the original application, and then the revised. And I think that somehow in between all of that, between the three of us, we're somehow getting muddled. And I think that's entirely our fault. But I agree that parts of it weren't labelled particularly well. So maybe we need to ask for. Can we ask? I mean, is it out of the question to ask for an extension on this and to get some clarity over some of the drawings? Because if we're all struggling with the same thing, it sounds like it might not be us, it's them.
So
I'd be happy with that.
Yeah. So could we go back to Central Beds and say we're not happy because we still think that there's a loss of street parking, but the drawings aren't clear, and could there be some clarification as to whether the proposals meet Central Beds parking requirements? Does that make sense?
I think that's good. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm happy to propose that if others are okay with it.
Are we happy with that then, colleagues, to go back and ask for clarification as to whether it meets the requirements? Yes, I'm getting nods. Right, land at Phase 6 Stratton Business Park. Advertisement and lights. Comments, please. We had no objection when it came before. Are there any changes? Councillor Frank Foster, sorry.
No objection, subject to neighbours.
Okay, thank you. Are we all happy? No objection? Yeah, thank you. 29 Market Square, listed building. Again, the logo on the existing fascia and various. Any comments, please?
No, move it subject to neighbours. I think it's an asset to the town, and actually what they've done is perfectly fine.
Are we all happy with that?
Absolutely.
Thank you. And then we had, let me just find what I'm looking at. We've got another item on a supplementary agenda, and I cannot for the life of me at the moment quite find it. Just a second. Yes, this is 29 Market Square again. It was no objection before, but this is installation of a staircase from the ground floor into the basement to enable the basement to be used as additional shop floor, together with removal of a kitchenette and installation of a kitchen on the second floor. Colleagues, comments, please.
Move no objection, subject to neighbours.
Okay, everybody happy with that? Councillor Ramsey, were you signalling?
Can I just ask about the staircase that they're proposing to have? into the basement, that is for their own use or for the public use?
It would be for public use if it's for shop floor area in the basement.
That's what I was trying to work out. Yes. Okay. So I assume all the health and safety stuff has been sorted out and looked at and all the rest of it. I'm just a bit concerned that members of the public will be going down into the basement and presumably then having to carry their stuff back up to the shop to pay for it. I'm just a little bit anxious about the way the public are going to use the staircase.
It's going to be a new staircase, so I presume it's to all the proper building regulations, but I don't know. Councillor Foster and then Councillor Grant-Fage. And then
I was just going to make the point that's not a planning issue. It's the consideration is whether or not it's a suitable thing for the plan. The building regs is another matter.
Councillor Grant-Fage and then Councillor Woodhead.
Sorry, I was going to say there are other premises in town which have stairs, namely Wetherspoons, and people go up and down those in a very different state to in Seasons Fruit and Veg. So I think, on balance, it should probably be okay. I think Councillor Foster's right. It's probably not a planning consideration. So happy to second the objection.
Well, thanks for the reassurance, Councillor Fage. Thank you.
Councillor Woodhead.
No, it was just a factual point. I think the kitchen upstairs is well, in fact, it's already been built. I know that. So, and it's being used for cookery demonstrations and that sort of thing. So, I'm not sure about the proposal downstairs. I think that's just more retail spaces. And I've spoken to the owner, so I'm kind of aware a little bit of what their plans are. So, I think probably your concerns are a bit unfounded, but as Councillor Foster says, it's probably a building regs issue anyway. But just to reassure, the kitchen's upstairs, and I think the basement would be used as additional retail space, is my understanding.
Councillor Frank Foster.
Can I just say that those of us remember Fisher's, the ironmonger's being there, when you went downstairs to the basin there as a customer, they had the biggest range of change you ever saw in your life. And so this is not a new thing for us to be customer space. And I think that's such a good business and such a thriving business there. We should give it every encouragement. But of course, we want to make sure that the customers are adequately safeguarded.
Thank you, Councillor Foster. I was thinking the same. I remember as a child going down into the basement and there were actually, there was shelving with storage that actually went out under the market square. Incredible. Okay, so back to business. No objection then. We're all happy with that. Yeah, okay, thank you very much. Right, we're on to accounts now. Over to you, Councillor Ramsey, please.
Yes, thank you. I propose that the Council receives and adopts the accounts of the Financial Administration, detailed balance sheet to the 31st of October 2020, summary income and expenditure by committee, the 31st of October, detailed income and expenditure by committee, the 31st of October, and the Lloyds Bank payment listing, October 2020. Thank you, Chair.
Do I have a seconder for that, please? Thank you, Councillor Fage. Okay, are we all happy to receive and adopt the accounts? Please show. Okay, thank you very much. So we're now on to items for consideration and the review of the financial regulations, and we have a report from Mr. Truppin. Do you wish to introduce the report, Mr. Truppin?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Yes, this follows on from the report that was considered by the Council at our last meeting, which there were some changes made, but members felt that they needed more time to consider the other proposals that were not adopted at the time. The report makes reference to that. What I've also done, and I don't know whether all members have received it, but I sent out this morning at the request of one of your colleagues, Madam Mayor, a comparison between what the regulation is at the moment under the financial regs adopted in December last year. And on that point, I've done a comparison between what the regulation was at that stage and what is being proposed by officers, taking into account what was decided last time in the first change, but the rest of the items were not addressed, and so you have basically the before and potentially after, depending upon the decision that you as councillors make this evening.
Thank you very much. Comments, please, colleagues. Councillor Pullinger.
Thank you. So I think generally I'm quite happy with the proposals. I think for all three of them, in that I think as we become a modern council, we need to work in that way and have the appropriate limits for what we do. And so I think I would like to move that we adopt the proposed regulation 4.1, 6.17 and 14.2. However, the proposal for 5.7 is that I think I mentioned previously, I'm not in favour of making any changes to that regulation. That regulation is in relation to grants and giving grants to other organisations, and as such, I think that is something which we as members should retain control over. Where there is only a finite budget for those that we have each year, and where they may be oversubscribed, then ultimately it comes down to a political decision, I guess, a decision that we should be making as councillors, I think, not one that we should delegate. So as I say, I would move that we accept the other three regulations, but not the change to regulation 5.7.
Do I have a seconder for that proposal?
Yep, I'll second that, please.
Thank you. Councillor Strawn, you wish to speak?
Yes, just a couple of questions. First, in respect of regulation 5.7, I think the grants are only approved by a committee or authorised committee. They're not actually delegated to officers to make the grant. So what I think that proposal is saying is the appropriate committee, say a town centre management, would be able to make a grant. And it's only if the grant figure went over the £15,000 would it go to F&GP. Whether the 15,000 is the right figure is another matter. But I don't. The way Councillor Pullinger was phrasing it, I thought he was implying that it was officers who made the grants, when it's not. It's the council or committees of the council that make it. Is that correct? And secondly, just with regard to regulation 6.17, it only makes reference to debit cards. Is there any merit in possibly adding credit cards to that if we're able to obtain one, which might be a better method than a debit card? I'd welcome officers' views.
May I come back, Madam Mayor?
Yes.
Yes. Regulation 5.7 is really an enabling regulation. As Councillor Strawn correctly points out, it does not delegate to officers. A duly authorised committee could still be the F&GP, because the F&GP basically considers what are considered to be, what we would call the 137 grants, and the majority would go there anyway. And there is a specific grants budget which is agreed each year, and obviously the council can only spend within that limit anyway. The point, I think, is really that the ability to make the grant is then delegated to the F&GP or other duly authorised committee authorised by the council under these regulations, and therefore essentially nothing until you get to 15,000 would be subject to ratification by the council. And also we've put in a stage here that it will be considered by F&GP anyway, who will presumably make a recommendation which council will then consider. I think the view of officers is that, certainly my view and officers I've spoken to, is that it would save time in full council, because you're actually delegating the setting of grants basically to, in the majority of cases, F&GP. What I would also say, I don't think it's the practice from what I've researched, and members will correct me because you've been here, many of you, a lot longer than I have, that it would be very unusual for an application for a grant of 15,000 or more to be considered, and even less likely to be approved.
Yeah, I mean,
I'll deal with that. I'll ask you to deal with that first, and then perhaps we'll come back to regulation 6.17 in a moment, the credit debit card issue?
Well, I was just thinking that our practice up until now has been that the F&GP committee goes through all the grants that organisations apply for, sorts out the allocation, and then makes that recommendation. So I don't think our normal grant process needs to change in any way, and I'm not sure that I don't think it is changed by what I'm reading here. And the only other grants that we have, the larger grants, always have come to council anyway, and they've been things like Link a Ride or the community agent from BRCC. It's been large amounts like that have come to council. So, I mean, I have no objection to them going to F&GP and a recommendation being made, but as somebody has already said, it would be very unusual for us to make a grant of more than 15,000. The issue was raised of a credit card as well as a debit card, and Councillor Strawn asked for any comments from officers. Does the clerk wish to add anything there, please?
Yeah, as my understanding of the financial regulations, and Philip can support me on this, is that they already allow us, in principle, to apply for a credit card. We've chosen not to do so far, but it would certainly be my intention to try and enable that. Philip.
Yes, Madam Mayor, if I can just come back to the previous point just very quickly about the grants. I mean, in fact, when you had a large application for grants such as from BRCC, and we're moving away from grant aiding there anyway. Policy of council now is to go for basically SLR agreement. But on the question of credit cards, I haven't included anything in the report because the financial regs, as were approved last year, already provide for application for a credit card to be made, but it will be in the hands of the town clerk only. So the town clerk would have access to the credit card. And the reason for that is because although you can put limits on the amount of the credit limit, you cannot put limits on the amount of individual items that you can purchase. So I think that was the concern before, but there is already provision within financial regs to grant a credit card to the town clerk.
Councillor Ramsey, and then Councillor Pullinger, and then Councillor Foster.
Just on this grant in excess of 15,000, I just wondered if all councillors are aware that the community agent is no longer going to be paid by grant, that we decided that, you know, she will be, as it were, reimbursed on a regular basis and there won't be any need to have a grant. So that was the most expensive grant that's going on there. So if the community agent is no longer going to be part of the grant process, I think the £15,000 is even more unlikely. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, it was Councillor Pullinger, and then I've lost.
Thank you. So just coming back on this then. So I was slightly mistaken in that I'd read it as being a delegation to officers, which it isn't, which I take on board. However, the current process essentially is that F&GP decide any grants up to £3,000 and report their decision to as an item for information to council. Anything over £3,000 comes to council for endorsement and approval. I don't see any reason to change that. I think 3,000 is a reasonable limit for that purpose when we consider the total size of the budget we've got for grants. So my proposal essentially stands in that I still I don't think that we should change regulation 5.7.
So your proposal is to accept the changes to the other three regulations, but to keep the previous 5.7.
Correct. Yeah.
Right, and you're still happy with that, Councillor Knight?
That's right. That's the basis on which I seconded. I reject that proposed change, but I'm supportive of all of the others.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Foster, I think, wanted to come in. Frank Foster.
Yeah, I just wanted to make the point to remind ourselves why credit cards or debit cards are being suggested. It is to give the clerk and the officers more flexibility on purchasing. They can go online and they can get better prices for us without the need of having to raise checks and all the rest of it. So this is a really good thing, and it's a positive step forward.
Thank you. Councillor Strawn, and then Councillor Woodhead.
just again on the point of the credit card, the regulations proposed only makes reference to a debit card. It would make sense to me if we actually included in that credit card and any debit card, which would then give the town clerk, if he is able to get a credit card, the ability to use it. It is only the town clerk who would actually be exercising that, and I think that would be a good thing if that was to be accepted by Councillor Pullinger in that regulation. I'm not worried about regulation 5-7 being altered personally.
I'll bring the clerk in and then I'll move on to Councillor Woodhead.
Just to clarify again, the existing financial regulations already allow the enablement of a credit card. We just haven't taken that step yet. So that's already supported. So we don't need to go forward on that particular issue.
Thank you. Councillor Woodhead.
Thanks. Just a very practical point. I mean, I realise we've already given permission about the credit card stuff, but I think I would be happier to see that used rather than a debit card, purely because there's more protection in terms of, you know, refunds and consumer protection, that sort of stuff, rather than a debit card. And obviously, and yeah, it just seems a more practical way of doing it, and actually protects the council or ever so slightly in terms of purchasing. So just a practical point, but I think I would prefer to see that on a debit card. But otherwise, I think it's a good regulation to bring in.
Mr. Clark, and then Councillor Fage.
It's just a very quick observation. I think, generally speaking, Councillor Woodhead is correct, but we've had an issue already this week connected to attempted fraud of the council, and which was picked up by our bank. So I'm pleased to say that our bank is being particularly effective in regard to protecting the interests of the council. I personally wouldn't have any issues connected to either debit card or credit card.
Thank you. Councillor Grant-Fage.
Thank you. I have just two comments. Firstly, on regulation 14.2, the proposed change, there's just a brief sentence at the bottom. Is the word over supposed to be included there, or is it just to £15,000? The way I read it, I didn't think it required the word over, because we're basically saying the 15,000 is replacing what was 3,000, so not exceeding 3,000, therefore not exceeding 15,000. That's sort of my first question. My second one is related to regulation 4.1. The proposed change is actually a question about whether or not we need to consider any delegation to committee. So perhaps Councillor Pullinger could clarify what the actual proposal is related to 4.1, please.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that, Madam Mayor. So actually, the document that Philip Tuppin sent out earlier today actually has the exact before and after wording. It's not what's in the papers we received initially, but it does indeed just change the word 3,000 to 15,000 in 14.2, and the wording similarly changed in 4.1.
Sorry, I missed that.
I think if we take the wording as in the paper we received today, I think that's what we should assume will be the new wording.
Okay. You made another point, Councillor Fage, and I've forgotten what it was, the first point.
It was about the word over being in 14.2. Potentially, do we need actually the word over in there at all? Estimated value of any one item of tangible movable property raised to over 15,000. Do we need over?
I've just confirmed that's not in the actual wording of the proposed.
I think Councillor Pullinger has just confirmed that as well. So he's actually answered both my questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Knight, and then I think we need to move to a vote on this.
Thanks. Can I just clarify the credit card, debit card business? So is the use of a credit card governed by the same regulation, 6.17, in which case the language should state it's covering both, or is there a different regulation that governs the transaction limits for a credit card?
May I answer that, Madam Mayor?
Yes, go on.
Yes. 6.17 at the moment says any debit card issued for use will be restricted to the town clerk, also be restricted to a single transaction. 6.18, so prepaid debit card may be issued to employees with variable limits, will be set by the F&GP committee. So the regulation 617 and 618, as stands at the moment, relates to prepaid debit cards and much more control, because the limits would be set by council on those debit cards, and single transaction limits as well. And the proposal is for the town clerk to have a higher single transaction limit on 617. Regulation 619 relates to corporate credit cards or trade cards owned by the council, specifically restricted to the use of the town clerk. And it says personal credit debit cards should not be used. So in fact, you already have, as has been pointed out by the town clerk, under 619, the ability to issue a credit card or a trade card to the town clerk. Regulation 617 is designed to give the town clerk a limit for any debit card issue to him. And the 618, which is also not proposed for amendment, applies to prepaid debit cards for members of the officers who are members of staff other than the town clerk, maybe perhaps the office manager, who would replace petty cash. And the idea of the prepaid debit card isn't to make large purchases where the credit card might be used for a larger, I don't mean a massive, but a larger purpose, where the debit card would be basically used for small purchases instead of petty cash. I hope I've clarified that, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. I'm going to move to a vote, otherwise we'll be here all night on this one. Councillor Pullinger, I think your proposal is that we accept 4.1, 617 and 14.2 as recommended, but we leave 5.7 as the current regulation.
That's correct.
Thank you. So all those in favour of that proposal, please. Anybody against? Abstentions? One abstention. Okay, thank you. Well, that's passed. So 4.1, 617 and 14.2 agreed the changes. 5.7 leave as is. Thank you very much. And before I lose my bit of paper, we're now on to public realm equipment. And we have a report from Bob Catchpole, our public realm manager. Do either the clerk or Mr. Catchpole wish to introduce this, please?
I'd like Bob to introduce it, please, if I could. Bob, would you like to explain the recommendations?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors. The report was shared with PLOS on the 24th of November, who were quite in favour of replacing some of the equipment. The original report to PLOS just only had costings from one supplier. So on the actual quotes on this report, we have quite significant savings. It's equipment that's valuably needed, because some of the equipment they have now is outdated. We have equipment that can't be used because it's dangerous. So the recommendation is to approve the quotes. Everything I've got is similar or same specs. The specs are met by the ones we've chosen. We've gone for best value, quality, and from suppliers we rely on, we trust.
Okay, so the clerk, do you wish to come in?
Just to reiterate, as a consequence of getting a wider range of quotations, then the overall cost to the council has gone down quite significantly. As Bob said, he shared the detailed quotations with his staff, so that as part of the decision-making process, the people who are actually going to use the equipment have given us some sense about what is the most sensible choice. So that's been very helpful indeed. And the other point I would make is that some of this is impacted in the existing year, and a small chunk is impacted in new financial year. I think what we do need to do is to connect this report to the depot report. So if this report does have member support, which I hope that it does, then I would only like to go ahead and make these purchases once we were clear that we had a safe and secure place to put them. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Knight, then Councillor Frank Foster, then Councillor Pullinger.
Thank you. Looks like a really good report, which I'm very supportive of. Just one quick question. So I notice on the tipping trailer, you're recommending going with a slightly more expensive option that's about £1,500 more. I just wondered if you could very briefly outline why your preference is to go for the more expensive tipper. Is there anything specific about it?
Well, it's a good make, and it meets all the specifications, and it's, you know, we want proper good equipment, so we've picked it on that basis.
But you think it's better quality, basically? Okay,
yeah,
thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Frank Foster and then Councillor Pullinger.
Yeah, I think we have to take the recommendation of the outdoor rail manager. We certainly are not experts in these ourselves. He's spoken to his people, and I'm quite happy to support whatever he suggests.
Thank you. Councillor Pullinger, then Councillor Woodhead.
I had the same question as Councillor Knight, so nothing else. Okay.
Councillor Woodhead.
No, I'd just like to say I'm very supportive of the paper. I just had a bit of a sort of side question. I don't know whether it's for Bob or for the town clerk, but it's just in relation to training, because obviously a lot of this is new equipment. Some of it is perhaps better spec or higher spec than we've had before. I just wondered if partly to extend the longevity of some of this equipment, but also just because it's new and extremely expensive, just is there some sort of training going to be involved, whether that's from the manufacturers of the equipment or from elsewhere, just so we're getting the best use and they're getting the best best life out of the equipment, and also, you know, duty of care and health and safety to our own staff as well. So just be interested to know about that.
Mr. Catchpole.
Yes, obviously. Some of the lads have got chipper training, so they can use the chippers. Carl's good on the tractor, but some of the suppliers, they will come and demonstrate and give us an overview of it all. But if there's ever further training needed, then we can arrange that. But most of them are trained up to use it. They've used chippers before. Carl's pretty good on the tractor. He's had courses on that. So, but yeah, they will help us out, show us how to use it safely, and obviously we'll apply to all that.
Okay.
Thank you. I'll come to the clerk and then Councillor Strawn.
I just wanted to reiterate a point, which was, I think Councillor Woodhead makes a very valid point in regard to safe manual handling. One of the reasons why I've recommended to members that we adopt a charge hand structure is to ensure that we have a senior person who is very familiar with proper manual handling and is very familiar with all items of equipment and can take a kind of local level responsibility for ensuring the safety of all our operatives. So that's one of the recommendations in a later report. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. So it was Councillor Strawn, wasn't it? Sorry, Councillor Strawn.
That's right, Madam Mayor. I assume that Councillor Foster was proposing that we accept the recommendations, and I'm quite happy to second that, subject to 2 points. One is that we have the appropriate depot to store the equipment before we actually acquire it. And secondly, taking in mind Councillor Woodhead's comments, that any necessary training for the staff be obtained.
Quite so.
So can I take the vote on this now then? So we're accepting the Public Rail Manager's recommendations with the proviso that the equipment is not purchased until there's somewhere safe to store it and that staff get appropriate training. All those in favour, please. I think that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Catchpole, for that. Right. We're on to Back Street and disabled parking spaces and the notice from Central Bedfordshire. Any comments, colleagues? Councillor Woodhead and then Councillor Fage.
I mean, I think on the whole, it's obviously an increase in disabled parking, which I think is broadly a good thing. I just had two other questions related to this. One is it going to put a squeeze on other residents parking on that street? As we all know, it's extremely narrow. It's meant to be a sort of cycle highway as well. I'm concerned about the additional sort of pressure it's putting on there. And if colleagues recall, we rejected what was the retreat property being converted into residential purely because of a lack of parking. around the sort of London Road and Back Street area. So it just seemed to me, in a sense, it's taking out some parking provision, much needed because it's disabled parking, but at the same time, it's just, I think it's condensing more things into a very narrow area, and it's just something we need to be aware of. I mean, I'm not sure what the answer is, but it is something that concerns me every time I go down there, which is probably about 2 or 3 times a week. So yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Page and then Councillor Pullinger.
I walked down here today and I'm not convinced by what we're reading. I don't think there are 3 resident parking spaces. I think there are 4. I had a look there today. There were 3 cars parked there, very spaced out there is very spaced out, and with probably space on the end for a 4th. If they were to park a bit closer together, there would be a 4th car on there. Forgive me, I can't recall off the top of my head if I have ever seen 4 cars parked there, but given the space that is there, the indications are that, that there's probably space for 4. What Councillor Woodhead says is right. There is a lack of parking provision down there, and there are, as far as I can see, around 8 or 9 properties all sharing a very small number of parking spaces. It's not terribly clear for those on the north side whether there's actually any parking around the back and whether that is residents parking for them or for the flats. So we know it's tight round there. We know it's not very convenient round there. Yes, the introduction of an extra disabled parking space is good, but it's not really if all it's doing is taking away an existing parking space normally for any car that anybody could use. So what we're basically doing is going from 1 disabled space and 3 normal spaces to 2 disabled spaces and 1 normal space. That's the way I see this. I'm not sure what other councillors see. Perhaps others have different interpretations, but my instinct is to push back on this and raise concern over loss of parking. If I might just add just one more thing. The idea that these parking spaces are close to the junction is really not true either. There are dozens of examples. There are dozens of examples elsewhere in Biggleswade where people park much closer to junctions. So it's quite possible that the damage that's been done to vehicles probably got more to do with the cycle lane, which goes in the wrong direction, and cars potentially moving out of the way of that. So I'd be tempted to push back on this, if I'm honest.
Pullinger, then Councillor Ramsey, then Councillor Mark Foster.
Yeah, I guess I'm very sympathetic, I think, with Councillor Fage's view. I think it does show the extension of the double yellow line, which I think accounts for that potential 4th space that he refers to. I think the comment I wanted to make is, of course, making them disabled spaces doesn't guarantee their availability for the residents who live on the street, because any disabled person would then be able to park in them. Whereas if they were both residential permit and disabled, then that would give them a better chance of being able to park in them. So I think that was one of my observation. My main observation really was actually there being 2 disabled people on the street in itself doesn't necessarily justify disabled spaces on the basis that they're not the only people who would be allowed to use them.
Thank you. Councillor Ramsey, please.
I disagree that it's not a dangerous junction. It says here to shorten the bays slightly and extend the double yellow line so the bays are a greater distance away from the junction. It is very tight. I agree that there are other junctions in Biggleswade that are tight, but this particular turning goes back on itself. So you really don't have a very clear view if you're turning left into it. So I think it's a very good idea to move the parking further back so that whoever is coming around into that road can actually see what is before them, whereas otherwise it is more of a blind corner. Those are all bungalows along there for elderly and vulnerable people. And in my experience, the parking bays that are used there are for health visitors, care workers, social workers, people that are coming in to care for the residents. And I don't think there's been any problems there about commuters or anybody else trying to park there. It is just acknowledged that that area is for the people in those bungalows. And I think sometimes when they're coming out of the houses opposite, the townhouses, that they do need a bit more room to pull out and swing round. It's a very busy junction and in a lot of times very dangerous. And I think if we can move the parking bays up to make that a little bit clearer, I think that'll be better all round. Thank you.
I've got Councillor Mark Foster and then Councillor Mark Knight.
Yeah, I mean, I think those of that drive may well have driven down Back Street and may well have experienced the tightness as you go around there. I'm not at all surprised that there's been damage to vehicles along there. I try to be careful, but it is tight. Let's be honest, it's tight, and that's what the issue is here. Whether there are 4 or 3 spaces down there, we need to make sure that we limit the damage to vehicles and make it more safer for both the pedestrians and the drivers and the residents of the area. So I'm fully in support of this. And not in disagreement, I guess, with Councillor Fage on this one.
Thank you. Councillor Knight.
Yeah, so in the past, residents have contacted me living along there because of the challenges they have parking. So I am more supportive of the line that the Councillor Fage takes, that I think if there is any possible way to be more creative about, rather than decreasing, but increasing the number of parking spaces, of course, people with disabilities should get priority. But at the same time, I think there's a genuine need to try and make sure all of the residents there have as much opportunity to park as possible. And if further alterations need to be made to the junction to make that safer, so be it. But double yellow lines should be a last resort. Although, of course, people with a disabled badge can park on those for 3 hours.
Thank you, Councillor Fage.
I was going to make a proposal then, so because I didn't formally make one before, and I don't think anybody else has. So I'd like to propose that we write back to Central Beds, raising concerns that actually there is a loss of a parking space because there are currently 4 rather than 3 in an area with limited residential parking. However, we perhaps can be supportive of a second allocated disabled space there. So it would be 2 disabled and 2 normal parking spaces, and again pushing back on the double yellow lines stretching further to the west. So that's what I'd like to propose.
So where are we going with this, councillors?
I'll happily second that proposal.
Oh, thank you. Right. Okay. So the proposal is that we want 2 residents and 2 disabled bays, even if that means restricting the double yellow lines. And for, I think, what was mentioned earlier, if Councillor Fage is happy to add it, is for Central Beds to look at other ways to make the junction London Road Back Street safer.
Yes, that's fine.
So all those in favour of the proposal in front of us, please. That's 8. All those against? Six against. Any abstentions? Okay, so that proposal is passed. So that's 2 residents, 2 disabled, and for Central Beds to look at the junction to see how it could be made safer in other ways. Right. We're on to items for information. Planning application outcomes. Any comments, colleagues, please? Councillor Knight.
Thank you. Just trying to find the right page. Page 52. So I noticed that was granted. We requested that CBC provide details of where the 106 monies are going to be allocated, and I just wondered whether we had any feedback on that at all, please.
Have we had anything, Clark?
Sorry, Philip, are you aware of anything? I haven't seen anything.
So
I've not seen anything concerning 106 at all.
So if you look at the first row on page 52,
Yeah.
that was the request. So I wonder if we can then maybe go back to CBC
in the
on
comments, Madam Mayor, but not had anything back.
So can we push for that, please?
We'll follow that on.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other comments on this, please? Councillor Grant Page.
I was just going to say on the same page, page 52, 12 Popal Road, how pleased that we objected to that, and that has also been refused. And I think the parking was an issue around there, which we raised and it's come up again. So it seems that we're making some progress when we're raising parking issues around Kingsreach. So we should perhaps continue to do so if we see future applications of similar ilk.
Woodhead.
I think you froze there, Madam Mayor, for a second. It's okay. Just in relation to page 51 and the sort of Lidl site. I mean, it was more of a broader point. I mean, we obviously gave permission, or was granted permission rather, about the signs. But does anybody know if any actual work's been started yet, or has heard when that construction is likely to be started? Because obviously, when it does start, it's going to be a very congested corner near McDonald's and on London Road. This is something we need to be aware of. But yeah, it's just more of a general point than a specific one there.
There is work in progress as we at the moment.
Okay.
Diggers on site.
Okay, I hadn't seen anything recently, so it must be that's good to see. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Anything else on planning application outcomes? Okay, I'm moving on. Crime statistics. Much better crime statistics than we've ever been used to. Helen Calvert, thank you for joining us. Do you wish to introduce this, Helen?
Yes, absolutely. Good evening, councillors. This evening I'm presenting the crime statistics report for Biggleswade for October 2020. In the report, the level of theft-related crimes within Biggleswade and the increase of recorded thefts from shops and stalls for 2020 was raised as a cause for concern. Simon Newton has since had a further discussion with Lisa Scott, the Safer Communities and Partnership Manager at Central Bedfordshire Council. A member of the Safer Communities team will be looking in greater depth at the theft data and will work alongside Bedfordshire Police to put together a response to this. And I will provide an update at a future meeting. So the report requests member input on whether the report meets the requests made at the 10th of November meeting and if any additional or alternative reports are required for the next council meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Comments, please, councillors. Councillor Woodhead and then Councillor Strawn.
Yeah, no, I just want to say thank you again to Helen for the report. It's nice and clear. I just think the only observation I've drawn, there'll probably be other colleagues have spotted, is on page 56, obviously the threefold increase this year on hate crime, which is particularly concerning. Obviously 5 last year and 15 this year. So it's yeah, just whether there's anything we ought to consider going forward on that, if there's anything we can do as a broader community. But it is that is probably one of the more worrying ones, and that it's such a big increase. But otherwise, I'll pass over to colleagues.
Thank you for that. Councillor Strawn.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think Helen has done an excellent job on getting these figures together. I was at a Biggleswade Community Safety Group meeting last night, and they'd literally just got the figures in for November. So I think that they're helping Helen with some of these aspects. But what I think is quite significant is we're talking about thefts, but if you look at the total number of assaults there have been in Biggleswade, they're roughly equivalent to the number of thefts. And that is actually, to my mind, quite an alarming statistic. The clerk and I are still, with the mayor, trying to meet with the senior officers of the police locally. And it's something that certainly I'll be raising with them to see why we're getting so many assaults in the town, because over 200 assaults in a year is quite concerning. And if members were to look at the graph on page 61 of the reports, in thefts, it's noticeable the highest point of thefts last year was basically from September through to December. And one thinks, well, that may well be due to the Christmas situation and needs there. but you will also note that there was a spike towards the end of the first lockdown period this year in thefts, which nearly reached the height of the thefts last year. And I'm wondering what will happen with regard to the graph for this year in comparative figures. But the report is, I think, doing an excellent job. The statistics are much clearer and giving us something to work on. But certainly, I think that hopefully we will be able to meet with the senior police soon so that we can get some more detail about how they're approaching these problems and perhaps finding out a little bit more about the incidences. But I know Helen's been doing a great job in getting this done, and I thank her. And I think we should also thank Amanda Cawthorne from the Biggleswade Community Safety Group, who has been, I think, a great help, Helen. But that's all I will say.
Okay, any further comments, colleagues, please? Okay, well, thank you, Helen, and please pass our thanks on to Amanda Cawthorne.
Thanks, bye-bye.
Keach Hospice Care. To note the fundraising that Keach want to do in the town this year. We've got quite a lot of detail there, and an email to say the drive-by will focus on Saxon Gate and St Andrews Park rather than in the initial report. Okay.
Noted.
Comments? Noted. Thank you very much. And then Land North, and we have a draft letter to Central Bedfordshire. Councillor Fage, would you like to introduce this, please?
Thank you. Yes, so just to provide some background to colleagues, Hallam Land Management have responded to our technical audit. They have also submitted further information, supplementary information to their transport assessment, and Central Bed's officers have responded to a transport assessment and asked for some more requirements from Hallam. So there's been a bit of movement, basically. The purpose of this letter is to respond to that new documentation, which is now available. Essentially laying out and reiterating some of the concerns which Town Council has raised in the past, but also taking into account the new information which we now have at our disposal. So hopefully the letter is self-explanatory. Certainly happy to take comments and feedback on it if required. But I'd like to propose that we send this to the usual contacts. I think Nick Smith, also Carter Jonas and Hallam Land Management, basically to give them the opportunity to respond and to make clear that the Town Council are continuing to engage on the documentation that they are making available to us. But happy to take comments as always.
Thank you very much. Councillor Pullinger.
So I'd like to second that proposal and just make the point that I think it is very well written. I think it very clearly reiterates the various important arguments that we've made before, and I don't think we need to rehash all of that again. I think this is a very good letter to summarise what we need to do next.
Thank you. Any further comments, colleagues? So all those in favour of sending this letter to Central Bedfordshire and to Hallam? I think that's everybody. Thank you very much, apart from Councillor Bond, who doesn't vote on planning issues at this council. Okay, so we're now into public open session again for the public to put questions or address the council in respect of any business of the Town Council. So do we have any members of the public who wish to ask questions? Please show your electronic hand if you do. And nobody is forthcoming. So I'm going to move on and say that we must move the resolution that it's advisable in the public interest that the public and press are excluded while the exempt items are discussed. So we have two items to discuss under exempt, and I would ask colleagues to resume in a few moments for our exempt session. Thank you very much.